Okay, so I'm going to show you 3 techniques that you can use to add value to your geometric shapes. And then of those 3, you're going to choose one that is your favorite in order to do that. So after you have all of your shapes drawn, you're going to add value and you want to show a range of values. So if we think back to our elements of art and we think about the element of value, value is how light or dark something is. So if we have a value scale, we can see a transition that goes from our darkest value, which in this case can be considered black. It travels lighter and lighter and lighter across the value scale. Once you get to the middle, that's your mid-tone. That's going to be around a middle gray, and then as you move further and further away down the scale, you get closer to white, and white is your lightest value. So if we look at these examples here, in what I've drawn already, I can see something really dark on this edge of my shape. As it moves towards the center, I have a mid-tone, that's my middle value, and then as it moves further away, I have my lighter values, which are closer to white. So what you're going to do is create a value scale within each new shape that is created by your overlapping shapes. So if you look at my final picture here, I have one little segment that's not done, but you can see all of these individual shapes are created by my overlapping shapes. So if you look in here, you can see like the diamond shape that I originally drew, but it's intersecting other shapes like my circle here and a triangle here. So where those intersect, I've created a new shape. So it's a shape, you know, without a name really, but it's a shape nonetheless. So it's an enclosed line, right, which defines something as a shape. So we're using all of these individual shapes that we've made by overlapping our lines to create smaller values within our shapes. So I'm going to show you how to do that using these different tools. So the first method I'm going to show you is charcoal. So there are some pros and cons to each of the materials and techniques that we'll go over in this tutorial. The pros for charcoal is you get really nice contrast, so you get darker shades more with charcoal than you would with any of the other materials, and it's easily blendable, so you can go from, you know, dark to light relatively easy with your blender. Some of the cons are because of the shape of the tip of the charcoal, sometimes it's harder to get into smaller areas and do fine details. And then it tends to be kind of, you know, messy because charcoal isn't as smooth when you apply it to the paper as like a pencil would be. So if you're left-handed like me, you can end up with it on your hand or, you know, on the surface of wherever you're drawing. So this one's going to be with charcoal, and you'll need a charcoal pencil and a tortillon, which is going to help you blend your value on your shape. So what you want to do is take a look at one of your shapes, and you can start anywhere. And you want to pick a point to start your darker value, and this could be anywhere on the shape. I'm just going to choose, you know, here in this section. As you're going, you want to kind of break up where you start the value, right? Maybe you don't want to start every value on the bottom of the shape. You want to do it in different areas to kind of break up where the dark values are and where the light values are. So with charcoal, a little bit goes a long way. So I'm starting here with my darkest value. I'm going to essentially just color in that corner with my black. Okay, and I don't have to press really hard for this at all. Charcoal is naturally pretty dark, so I don't have to do a lot with it. But that's my darkest value. As I go away from that value, I want to just lighten up the pressure on my charcoal pencil, and I'll get something that looks kind of scratchy like this one here. Right, that's going to keep my value a little bit lighter when I go to blend it. The rest of the space of the shape I can leave white because I'm going to use my blender to push this charcoal out into that space, and that's going to give me that scale that goes from my darkest shade up to my lightest shade. So I'm going to use my blender. I'm going to go a little bit over the black, but I'm mostly focusing on where my lighter value and my darker value meet, and I'm just smoothing that out. So I'm taking my tortilla in my blender, and rather than going just straight up and down like this, I'm moving it in a circular shape, so it's almost like, imagine like a grain of rice, right? Along the edge you might need to make it straight, but when you're blending out here, if you go in more of like an oval pattern or a circular pattern, it'll soften it up a lot more, and you won't really see streaks or lines in it the way you would if you just went straight up and down. So what I'm doing is essentially I'm pulling the charcoal off of the page that's already there, and I'm transferring it, I'm distributing it to the rest of the shape. As I move further away, my blender has less charcoal on it, so it's getting lighter and lighter and lighter as it goes. And as you get towards the other side of your shape, you should see, you know, there's very little left on there, and it starts to look almost white, or, you know, it's white close to the edge because there's nothing left to pull over there. Okay, so it should resemble something like that there. I would suggest keeping like a notepad or a scrap piece of paper close by. That way, if this gets too dirty, you can use your scrap paper and kind of color back and forth and twist it on there, and it's going to get any extra charcoal off of your blender. That way, if you're going and doing something light, it's not going to, you know, be a dark smudge across it. So I just did this one on this side, so now I'm going to transfer it. I'm going to do the opposite, and I'm going to go on this side to finish off this drawing and do one here. So remember, dark on one end, and then just as you move away, imagine you're creating a little value scale for yourself within that shape. So I get lighter as I move away. Right, and then the rest of it, I don't really need to do anything because my blender is going to do the work for me. So where they meet, I'm going to go over a little bit and blend there. As I get close to the edge, I'm going to try to keep it precise and within the shape. So I want to slow down around my edges, especially. And then on the interior, I want to use that oval motion. I want to make those little grains of rice when I go to blend them in. What I like to do, and what you may find adds a little interesting effect to it, is when I get close to another shape, I try to leave a little white halo next to it. Just creates a little bit more of an interesting effect and helps break it up a little bit more, especially if you have two values that are really close to each other. It helps break up the space a bit more. Alright, so eventually you should have something that looks like this. This takes quite a bit of time to do because there are several shapes, so please take your time doing it and don't rush through it. That way you get, you know, a nice result that you can be proud of in the end here. But your end result should look a little something like this. Another technique is using pencil to do it. So there are, you know, pros and cons to each. So a pro of using pencil is that it can be really precise in areas where you need to be precise. So it's a lot thinner tip than the charcoal pencil, so you can get into, you know, more nooks and crannies when you do it. And it's cleaner, so you're not going to smudge it as much as you would with charcoal. So if you were concerned about those sorts of things, being able to do something really detailed, or like not being messy or getting it smudgy, this might be a good one to consider. The con compared to charcoal is that it's not as, you don't get as much contrast, so it's not as dark as your charcoal is going to be. So if you want something that like packs a little bit more punch, you might want to go with the charcoal because it's not as soft as the pencil. But it's the same idea essentially for this. You're controlling this a lot more with pressure. So if I have my darkest value here, I'm pressing down pretty hard. As I move away, I'm going to lighten up my pressure until I get to the point where I'm like barely touching the surface of the page. you can also use your blender for this step too. So this is going to smooth everything out, and it's going to help transfer that value and distribute it across the shape. So I'm just going in here, and I'm still doing those circular motions in the center to keep it smooth and avoid any streaks. Right, and I'll end up with something that looks like this. Okay. Last option, last technique is colored pencil. So with this, colored pencil doesn't really blend like graphite or charcoal does. So a technique that you will want to use for this is just making sure, like with your pencil, your regular pencil, that you're really controlling the pressure with this one, because you don't have any ability to go back in and use a blender to spread everything out across the page. So a pro to this one is obviously there's color. If you want something colorful, it's not just in grayscale or dark and light values in terms of black. You can use a colored value if that's what you're interested in. It also has a finer point, which is, again, easier to go in corners and do details that you can't really get as well with charcoal. But a con is it's not as easily blended as the pencil or the charcoal would be. So just something to keep in mind if you do choose to do this technique. So with this, again, pressure is your big focus with this. So where you have your dark values, you really want to apply a lot of pressure to get a saturated value. I would not choose a color like yellow, because it's hard to get something that's really dark in terms of yellow, and it will tend to look kind of flat. So you want to select a color where you can show value pretty easily. And as I move away from my dark shadow there, I'm lightening up as I move away each time until I get towards the end of my shape. It's going to be barely touching the surface of my paper, so I have something super light. Okay, and then sometimes you might need to go back in and go, okay, well, I know this needs to be darker, or my mid-tone isn't dark enough. I have to go back in and relayer it. Okay, so work on getting that smooth, because you won't have the opportunity to do that with your blender. So this is essentially how this one will look. Alright, so here are the three together side by side. And remember, you are choosing one of them. You're either doing charcoal or regular graphite pencil or a colored pencil.